Hi everyone, I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of DevX. This week we'll be breaking down the big headlines in global development and bringing in some top experts to help us do it. If you want to follow along with the stories we're talking about, check out devx.com and subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Newswire. There's a link in the description. Follow us along on Twitter and you can see many of the stories we're talking about today, and we'd love to hear what you think. This is This Week in Global Development. Well, hello and welcome to a special episode of DevX's weekly show, This Week in Global Development, where we talk about all the global development headlines. I'm Raj Kumar, I'm the President and Editor-in-Chief here at DevX, and we've got a special episode this week because we are talking about the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, an organization and a prize that I just got involved with and learned a lot about in the past year, and I'm just thrilled to bring it to this audience. If you are in the humanitarian space, you work in global development, this is an initiative and a prize you ought to be familiar with, and we're going to dig into its history and where it's going today in a conversation with, among others, its co-founder, Dr. Nubar Afeyan. Nubar, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Raj.
Nubar is someone the global development community ought to know well for this role, but also for the many other positions and roles you've held, especially in global health as a co-founder and chairman of Moderna, among other things. You're also the founder and CEO of Flagship Pioneering and have been behind so many innovations in the health and biotech space. We're also joined by Mirza Dinai. Hi, Mirza.
Hi, Raj.
Great to hear your voice, Mirza. And in 2019, you won the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. You're a laureate, and you are an activist and a co-founder and director of Air Bridge Iraq. We're really eager and interested to hear more about your story. And we're also joined by Alice Greenwald. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Raj.
And Alice is a board member of Aurora and is a founder and principal of Memory Matters. Maybe I could just begin with you, Nubar. It's really a thrill to have all three of you here. And just for those who are listening in but don't actually know the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, what is it? What is the prize? Why did you help set this up with a couple of good friends just, I guess, about a decade ago?
Well, yeah, so the prize has its roots in the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, which was commemorated in 2015. And at that time, together with two colleagues, fellow philanthropists and humanitarians, Vartan Grigoryan, the late Vartan Grigoryan of the Carnegie Corporation, and Ruben Vartanian, who is himself of Armenian origin, then based in Russia, and a philanthropist entrepreneur. The three of us, having worked together in other projects before, conceived of a way to honor the memory of the victims of the genocide, and more importantly, the people who saved the lives of those whose descendants we are. One of the things that we talked about a lot back a decade ago is the degree to which these types of catastrophic and criminal events, such as genocides, often produce victims and perpetrators, but at the same time, there are saviors and survivors. And of course, survivors then have to recover and tell the story of what led to their survival. But over time, that whole axis kind of is lost, and we wanted to bring that to life. Of course, what do you do 100 years later when all these people have long gone? And the answer to us was, why don't we go find people who are doing the work of those who saved our ancestors today and empower them to honor what happened 100 years ago to save the lives of our grandparents. That's the genesis of the idea. And together with Vartan and Ruben, we set out to form this humanitarian initiative. And as part of that, an annual prize that really shines a spotlight on such people from all around the world.
That was one of the things that was most surprising to me when I got to attend the prize ceremony, and I thought most poignant too, was I assumed, only knowing Aurora, from a distance, that this was an organization, given its roots, that was very focused on Armenia specifically. And one of the things I learned was that actually you're taking the idea of humanitarianism and you're really making it global. You're using this as a platform to support humanitarians all over the world, wherever they may be. And that was a really kind of surprising thing to me, and I thought really poignant. Alice, you're a board member. You've been part of this before. Maybe you want to say a word about sort of when you think about who wins, how do you decide what organizations win this prize? What makes it unique or different from other prizes?
Well, Aurora is really about this idea of gratitude in action. And there is a whole group of people who are part of a jury. There are, it's a global call for submissions of people to be nominated for the prize. And they come in the hundreds, people all over the world who are aware of neighbors, of people active in their communities, of people active across the globe who are doing these humanitarian things. So it is a global invitation to recognize people with the instinct to be upstanders, not just bystanders. And as a result, I think it becomes something that everyone can relate to. We all want to help other people. We don't know how. And yet you see these incredible individuals like Mirza, who's on the call with us on this interview, people who are like us, who are responding when they see people in need. And instead of hiding away or not paying attention or becoming distracted by the next item in the news cycle, they commit themselves to positive change. And I think that's what makes it so extraordinary.
Yeah, that was another of the things that came out to me, and it was actually Newbar who made this point when we had our conversations there at the Aurora Prize ceremony, that this is a prize that goes to individuals, and I think part of the thinking behind that is it shows anyone can be a humanitarian. You don't have to be a professional. And we often at DevX were reporting for an audience of humanitarian professionals. People have dedicated their lives to this. They've even done degrees in it. But actually, anyone can be a humanitarian if you feel it, if you have the passion for it. And the prize, in a way, shows that by awarding and highlighting incredible individuals, not necessarily just organizations. So these individuals stand out. And Mirza, you won the prize. Maybe just tell us what that was like. Like, I want to hear more about your work, but did you get a phone call from Newbar or someone else? Like, what was the experience of winning this award?
Well, it was actually completely unexpected. One day I got an email from Aurora Initiative that I have been nominated. I don't know even until now who has nominated me for the prize. I just hear the name of Aurora Prize because of the Armenian Genocide, because we are every year we have very good Armenian friends, and we know they are making the commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. And then after a couple of weeks or month, then they told me that I have been selected as one of the finalists, one of 3 finalists. I didn't expect even that I will get the prize. I just was happy because I was working very hard with the victims. It was a period of my life where I said, I am completely destroyed because of all the traumatized people that I am dealing with. And you don't need to hear the thank from the people, but you just need a kind of recognition, moral recognition. So it was so important for me to have that. And
Yeah, your community, the Yazidi community, has obviously gone through a lot. Maybe you could just say a bit about what work you were doing at the time you won this prize.
Well, first of all, my humanitarian career goes back to 2007 as Al-Qaeda terror organization attacked 2 Yazidi villages and killed in that terror attack 310 people and injured 850, among of them many children. So at that time I was head of Yazidi community in Germany, and I just made spontaneously with my colleagues just a small fundraising and brought that money to the family of the victims, and realized that there were many children, very sick children and severely injured in hospital of Duhok. And I started just spontaneously without any support. I brought the first group of 6 children to Germany for the treatment, and after the treatment I brought the children back, and we said, okay, if we can help 6 children, maybe we can help many other children. Therefore we established Luftbrücke Iraq, Airbridge Iraq, which is a very small NGO in Germany that we were helping the whole Iraqi children, terror victims and injured in the German hospital. This was the beginning of my humanitarian, and just it became a most important part of my life. I was doing every 2 months or 3 months a new mission, brought the children from Iraq to Germany for the treatment and back. And as ISIS attacked the Yazidis, I was by chance in Erbil, and I joined the volunteer Iraqi aviation voluntarily to bring food and water to the mount via helicopter. And I realized a big number of Yazidi women and children in the captivity of ISIS. When they came back, they were not only sexually abused, they were completely traumatized. They lost most member of their families. Therefore, we did a kind of advocacy in Germany in order to treat those women and children in Germany. And I was responsible of the local office to select those women and children, and we did that project. So you can imagine, if you start just to interview all those victims, within 1 week you are interviewing 100 women and children who were in the captivity, completely abused physically, psychologically, and also women sexually. And in that moment where I was suffering from all those remains of the stories and memories of all those victims that I have interviewed, then I got the prize. It was so a moment that I said, well, the work that I did was correct, otherwise I will be not recognized by the international community and by Aurora family.
What an incredible personal story, and what a moment to have received the news about that prize. One of the things you're making me think of is just this idea that you lived this with your community, right? You were there on the front lines. And there's a big conversation happening in the humanitarian sector about, localizing the work of humanitarianism. And I imagine at the time you were doing this work, you weren't thinking about a term like localization. This was just your community, and you were there, and you wanted to support them. We in the development community, in the humanitarian community, often use this terminology. We think about the other, right, as though some international organization is going to come in and save the day. And what's fascinating to me about Aurora, about your story, Mizra, is just this idea of starting from people where they are and the communities where they are and supporting them. Maybe Nubar, you could say a word about that. You have this unique vantage point because you're not of the humanitarian community, but here you are now a leader in it through this work. How do you see this issue of localization and where Aurora fits in?
Well, first of all, when we started 10 years ago, the large refugee waves going to Europe from Northern Africa and different Iraq, different places, was not even largely afoot. And so we were kind of thinking that we were trying to bring attention to what was a rather obscure kind of set of situations which needed that kind of attention. Ironically, the spotlight has gone from the refugee crisis to all the wars that are going on, and there has never been in recent memory as much need for humanitarian action. We kind of looked at how do we put the human back into humanitarian? And of course, the human is essentially a local entity. They impact people. It's a retail activity. It's not a wholesale activity. And then we also thought, okay, so how do you get more people, when given the moment, the choice of acting in a humanitarian way or not, whatever preparation they had, to take the choice of stepping into that breach, just like the people who saved my grandfather's life 100 years ago. In my case, by the way, these were German soldiers whose commanders were complicit in carrying out a genocide with the then Ottoman Empire, who essentially hid and saved my grandfather, which is the only reason I'm here. So there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of such stories. So the question is, how do we get people to do that in that moment? And the answer is, in one way, and that's what we're trying to advocate, is get the stories out of other humans who've done this and actually celebrate their work as a draw to others to say, I want to be like Mirza. I want to be like Dr. Mukwege. as opposed to, I want to be an organization. Like, I don't know how a human aspires to be an organization, but a human can aspire to be another human. And so that's where we've really doubled down. The community we've built of hundreds and hundreds of, highly vetted in terms of their experiences. We've gotten the people together. We're learning from them. We think this is one complementary way to attract a generation of folks. Look, at a time when both man-made and natural disasters, the pandemic, climate change, humanitarianism is going to be, unfortunately, in ever-growing demand. And we think that this initiative can help people really prepare for the moment where you have the opportunity to save others, and in the process, instill in them the sense of gratitude that then is going to cause them, when they get back on their feet, to do more and more of it. That's the essence of this virtuous cycle that's at the core of Aurora.
Are you looking for the inside story on what's happening at organisations like the World Bank, USAID or the Gates Foundation? Then you need to be reading DevEx Pro. I'm Jessica Abrahams and I'm the editor of DevEx Pro. Pro is DevEx's premium news subscription, where our expert reporters and analysts take you beyond the headlines, deep into the trends and institutions shaping the $200 billion aid industry. As well as all our news, you'll get access to conversations with global development leaders, resources to help you grow in your career, and a subscriber-only newsletter full of insider news and tidbits. See for yourself by getting a free trial today at devex.com/pro.
Maybe we can just stay on this theme, Alice, because the way Nubar talks about it, putting the human back in humanitarian, he's right. This is not how those of us who work in this community think of this. And it's easy to sort of bureaucratize the approach to solving the world's biggest challenges and to look to big institutions. But you have a really unique vantage point, Alice, because of your role, maybe as one of the foremost experts in the world, really, on memorializing incidents of trauma and tragedy. You were the president and CEO of the National September 11th Memorial. You played a lead role at the Holocaust Museum. This is the kind of work you do. And think about, so when you look back on the history of genocides, of tragedy, of trauma, I'm imagining you might see something like what Nubar is talking about, that it's actually individuals that come to the fore and not organizations. But you tell me, how do you think about this?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and Nubar did as well. It's about the stories. When we talked about creating the 9/11 Memorial Museum, it was very soon after the events. We started work in the spring of 2006, so not even 5 years since an event that traumatized, not just New York City and the United States, but the world at the time. And in a way, that was a blessing for our effort, because since we didn't have libraries filled with historians' tomes about, the causes and effects and reverberations of the event, all we could do was tell the stories of the people who went through it, the people who witnessed it, the people who survived the attacks. And we came to think of our project not as a museum about a historical event, but it was a museum that told the human story of a historical event. It was about the human experience of it. And that is actually, I think, core to its success as a place that really resonates with everybody who comes in. So when you think about the world we live in, which is, I would say, a place that has a deficit of empathy, where do human beings learn what empathy is about? How do you learn to be empathic and empathetic? You learn it through stories about other human beings. And, the great Elie Wiesel, a great writer, Holocaust survivor, humanitarian himself, Elie once wrote that God made man because God loves stories. And for Wiesel, stories were the source of a moral purpose. They could present humanity in its entire scope, from our human capacity for unfathomable evil to our human capacity for profound goodness. And these stories present us with a choice. What kind of human being do you want to be? We know we're capable of both extremes. So, when we listen to the stories of Aurora laureates and humanitarians, we do see ourselves in them. They saw themselves in the suffering of another human being. It is literally a lesson in empathy. And we learn to become empathic and empathetic by listening to these stories and by putting them front and forward. I think when one hears Mirza's story, when we hear Dr. Mukwege's story, Dr. Dennis Mukwege was the laureate this year. And I will share one very personal story because it was so stunning to me. Dr. Mukwege is a physician. He's a gynecologist in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He has spent his career helping women who have suffered rape as an act of war. He's an advocate against rape as a weapon of war. And he has worked to provide healing and recovery for women, not just medically, but in every facet of their lives, psychologically, emotionally, socially, economically. It's about bringing people back to their full humanity after a trauma of unthinkable proportions. And I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Mukwege some years ago in Yerevan, Armenia, at another Aurora event. And we were walking to some dinner or program together. And I asked him somewhat naively, I said, Dennis, how did you get into this line of work? And he looked at me, stopped in his tracks, and he said, Alice, everyone has a mother. And that's all he said. That's the core of what Aurora is about. That is the core of what the humanitarian impulse is about. It's recognizing what we share in common as human beings, not what divides us.
And I think that's such an important message, Alice, in part because in the humanitarian community, we live with this idea of scarcity, right? There's always more conflict and tragedy than there are resources. And there's a sense that humanitarian organizations are stretched thin, that there's simply no way they can meet the needs of the moment. But if you think of it with a different lens, which is the lens you're bringing to this and Nubar and Mirza is bringing, which is everyone is a humanitarian, right? And everyone has that ability. It starts to change maybe the kinds of solutions that this community comes up with. I remember talking to one of the founders of Airbnb who expressed their surprise when there was a tragedy somewhere, a humanitarian situation, and the Airbnb hosts, the people who were renting their homes on Airbnb, called the company and said, how can we just give our homes to people who need them, to refugees or whose houses have burned? And they were kind of surprised they didn't have the mechanism for it, and they had to set that up, right? But think of the human impulse there, that there's people by the thousands, by the millions. You can see it in Europe with all the Ukrainian refugees, and they've been hosted by families who say, how can I help? And I think that is a very different lens on which to look at these issues. And maybe, Mirza, I can bring you into the discussion again on this point, because this is a big prize for an individual. It's $1 million, right? This is not insignificant for someone like yourself on the front lines doing this work. On the other hand, it's a drop in the ocean when you think of the amount of need that's out there. So I guess I want to understand how you think about it as a humanitarian yourself when you see the level of need in the Yazidi community or more broadly in the region, in the world, versus the resources you have available. How do you think about that gap? And how do you keep that from making you feel hopeless in this moment?
Well, Raj, one of the characteristics of the humanitarian work is that you know exactly that you cannot do all things that is needed, and this brings you live all your life in somehow feel somehow guilty because you are not sure, at least, whether you did the correct or not. This is a question that you are asking yourself every night when you finish any job, because you find on the ground 1,000 people need you, and from those 1,000 people you are just helping 10. And so you can imagine at the end of the day you ask yourself, were those 10 the correct 10 people? Did I do correct work in order to save them? So this is a situation that you live in. Most of the humanitarians like me are somehow crazy because you are working in a situation you know exactly at the end your life, you will not see that you did everything correct and you solved all the success, but at least from inside you feel released, because you know you did the best that you could. Unfortunately, the situation in the Yazidi community, for example, we have still 65% of the community are in IDP camps. They are living since 10 years in the tent, by the winter and by summer in the tent. And maybe you can help 1,000 people or 2,000 people, but still 500,000 people are in need. But if we go back, I think therefore Aurora humanitarian family is so important, because one of the duties of the Aurora is awakening humanity, which is so very important aspect and objective, because for our understanding, humanitarian work and humanity is a duty of everybody, and especially you go back to the grassroots. So you are choosing people from somewhere who are just ordinary people that by chance maybe, or from the instinct, they became humanitarian because the situation, the crisis that we are living in. So you are giving a power to this group or this people or this person in order to increase the work of humanitarian, and raising awareness about the humanitarian demands is so important. And I think we need the Aurora network, and also similar like Aurora network, to be working actively in different parts of the world in order to increase this kind of awareness about the humanity and the humanism.
Nubar, you talked about how when you started this initiative, in many ways the world was more peaceful. I mean, there were still many humanitarian challenges, but each year since 2015, we've just seen the number of displaced people. Mirza talks about the Yazidi community. The numbers of internally displaced people, IDPs, had just grown and grown. We have well over 100 million people around the world who, are forcibly kept from their homes. How do you think about where you take this from here, given the impact you've already had, but what's really happening in the world today?
Yeah, I guess as I alluded to earlier, you could say that we haven't been successful in that the need has gone up, and maybe it may be one measure of impact would be if the need goes down. But the reality is that I think it's part of the human condition that there is conflict. We tend to generally kind of take prevention, whether it's a disease or whether it's these kinds of conflicts, less seriously, and then it gets much harder to treat once something is afoot. And at the end of the day, I think what we can do, our piece of this, is to grow awareness, grow the resources available to people who find themselves engaged at anywhere and everywhere in the world. I mean, I think your audience would benefit from knowing that we're getting, for example, nominations across 140 countries over the 9 years that we've operated. We've had something closer to 4,000, almost 5,000 different individual cases of nominations, and that process, the identifying of people who can then take it upon themselves through their stories, as Alice said, and the narrative that comes around that, to create a symphony of empathy, as opposed to individual acts of this, and people gonna get drawn into the fact that this is to be honest, I think most of the people we interact with neither want the fame, nor thought they were going to do this, nor want to serve as an example to others, but they feel drafted by the circumstances. And I actually think that survivors have as much of a role to play in advancing this experiential storytelling as the saviors, who tend to not want to be put in that situation. I remember at the 9/11 museum, an event that we did jointly between Aurora and the museum, where the firefighters, and I remember very, very well, seared in my memory, was the storytelling involved in the role they played. In that day, that's not what they wanted to do, but they realized that having done this, they have a special role. They've been given, I sometimes view this survival experience as, people who manufacture second chance at life for others. And when you give somebody a second chance at life, they lose, in a way, the roots of their first chance at life, which comes from their parents, and now are given a second chance, which doesn't have parents. It's an arbitrary moment. It's some unknown person who stepped in and saved you. And that feeling is a very powerful and positive feeling if people can kind of put it to use. And that's where Aurora can really play a role. And we're trying to, make this initiative a permanent initiative, use this to get into, frankly, education. How do we get these examples to be magnified and amplified and used to inspire others? A lot of work to do. And, it's the good news is that the large scale work is being done. It's professional and it's having massive impact, and it's never enough of it. The distributed retail work that I think is somewhat more identifiable and resonant with individuals has a long way to go, and we're one of many, I'm sure, who will undertake this.
I want to give Alice and Mirza a chance, just as we are wrapping up, to give their own thoughts about where the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative might go from here. What would you like to see this initiative do in the future, Alice?
Well, I wanted to do more of the same, because I think there's not enough of what Aurora is doing in the world, and the world does not stop giving us opportunities to respond to humanitarian need. It feels like it's relentless. The minute one news cycle passes, the next breaking news event happens, and our heartstrings are pulled, and then we're pulled in another direction. What Aurora does is it keeps shining the light on the good work that people are doing day in and day out all over the world. They don't stop when the news cycle moves on. They continue to give and to work in their communities. And I think what is at the root of gratitude in action is all of us. All of us has somebody in our lives to thank for where we are and what we've achieved, whether it's a teacher or a mentor or a parent or a friend. How do you pay that back? Well, you pay it back, Aurora tells us and demonstrates, by inviting other people to do for others what was done for you. It's that sense of connectedness, of recognition that we're not alone in this. We're here because of what other people have made possible for us. And it's similar to the question we would ask at the 9/11 Museum all the time, which is, what's the best way to remember? How do you honor the memory of the life of a human being taken so dramatically and wrongly? How do you honor their lives cut short? And the answer would come up again and again, and it would come up from family members. It would come up from survivors, that you do the right thing to remember. You remember best by creating a world in which such things won't happen, or happen less frequently. So building a better world, repairing the world, doing the work on the ground of helping your neighbors, helping your friends, helping the people in your community, that's how you begin incrementally, step by step, to remember well and also to pay it back.
I love that way of thinking about remembrance through action. There's what is your thought? Nubar talks about taking this initiative from something that was, meant to just be around a decade and making it more of a permanent institution. What would you want to see Aurora grow into being?
Well, Nubar and Alice, they talk most of the thought that I wanted to express. The Aurora Initiative is actually unique. So unique in its character, unique is also in its principles. And I think we need to expand the work that Aurora Network is doing. So to increase the work that Aurora is doing, especially regarding the rising awareness about human duty, humanism, and humanitarian work. And this is the core principle of Aurora. And the unique thing in Aurora principle is this gratitude in action. So you are not thanking the person who helped you. you give this gratitude to someone who is doing similar that some people did to you. So it's really unique. And I think this principle should be expanded in the whole world. Unfortunately, because we are living from a crisis to the crisis, therefore, the positive spirit of a human being and humankind family that Aurora Prize and Aurora Humanitarian Family is holding, we should follow up these steps. And I think it's so important that we can do it in every part of the world.
It's probably my bias as an entrepreneur, but I tend to think that development in the humanitarian community could use a little bit more disruption. And I think one of the things that's so exciting listening to all of you talk about Aurora is it's a disruptive idea, right? This is a community of people who really aim to do good things in the world. When I think about people who work at UN agencies and big international NGOs, these are people who've dedicated their lives to doing important and good work, and yet they too are frustrated by the way the system works. And a new idea, a fresh idea, a more expansive idea, I think is something a lot of people will embrace and want to engage with. And so I really encourage those of you listening to this episode to reach out and let us know, what do you think about it? How do you feel that your organization or you as an individual can engage with Aurora and with these concepts? I guess it makes sense, Nubar, for you as an entrepreneur yourself, to have come in and sort of disrupted this space with a big new idea. I love the way you think of from Alice's deficit of empathy to a symphony of empathy. What a way to describe where we could go as a world, Nubar.
Yeah, thanks a lot for doing this, Raj. And I'll just say to your last point, whether it's in innovation or in any other aspect, there's incumbents and there's insurgents. And one of the things people don't realize is that the insurgents do a great service to incumbents because it makes them rejuvenate, regenerate, and try new things that otherwise they thought their incumbency entitled them not to have to do. And it's the dynamic between the two, which really hasn't really been in the humanitarian sector very much, that we're trying to bring to bear. But that dynamic definitely is where disruption comes from. The goal is not disruption. The effect is destruction. It's creative destruction. And we need that more than ever in this sector.
Yeah, we really do. And I've learned a lot in this conversation. And Nubar, so great to get to see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been This Week in Global Development. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe using the link in the description. To get even more coverage and analysis on the most pressing development issues of the day, become a DevX Pro member by going to devx.com/membership and signing up. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.